Welcome to Salute. I'm your host, Bob Peters, and we are at the Leesburg Community Center for a special presentation honoring veterans. And I have the organizer over here, Cheryl Winter, who is a member of the Kiwanis Club and the Daughters of the American Revolution. Am I correct?
That's correct, Bob.
And how did this come about, Cheryl?
One of our members in the Mary Ellen Robertson chapter of the DAR, Candy Davis, volunteered to do this commemoration event, and then Candy became sick, and so I volunteered to take over. And this is through the Department of Defense, and it is a program that we have volunteered to put on 2 events a year to honor the veterans for 3 years.
Yeah, I talked to you a little bit on the phone, and I don't think you understood how many veterans there are, especially Vietnam veterans in the area.
Oh my goodness gracious, that's the truth. We are very, very overwhelmed at the number of people that wanted to come out and support our Vietnam veterans. And the veterans themselves seem to be really appreciative of this event and are coming out and calling.
Good. Now, can you tell me a little bit about who will be speaking today?
Well, we have 2 different people that we've have asked to speak. One of them is Representative Larry Metz, and he introduced House Bill 9097, which honors the Florida veterans. Our other speaker will be Karen Burris. She is the Associate Minister at Morrison United Methodist Church.
And you have several different other organizations that are here. I see the Marine Corps, some from the Marine Corps League, or...
Yes, well, we've got the Pembroke Fairways has an honor guard, and you see that they are in uniform and are going to present the ceremony today. Also, there are people from Umatilla Kiwanis, Mount Dora Kiwanis, Lady Lake Kiwanis, and of course our local Kiwanis Club. In addition, I have representatives here from the DAR chapter of Bertha Herford Hall and Pugpuggy.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to this presentation, and I want to thank you as a Vietnam veteran for putting this on for some of our veterans, and I think we'll be running into each other again.
I hope so, Bob.
All right,
nice talking to you.
Thank you. I'm here with Frank Vallant, who is a Coast Guard veteran, and he will be part of this presentation today. I got quite an honor guard and quite a few veterans here, and maybe as we turn around, you can introduce me to some of these veterans we have here.
U.S. Army, Warren Clark.
Warren Clark, thank you for your service.
Ray Ozan.
Nice to meet you, sir. Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. J.R.
JR, I heard about you, JR. Pembroke, the word's out about you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I understand you were very big in help putting this together.
I helped Cheryl as much as I could.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank
I want to
you,
thank
sir.
all of you for your service. Sir,
Ken Maritzak.
Ken Marisak, good to meet you.
Tom Mosky.
Tom, nice to meet you. Got to have a Marine in the crew.
Chuck Harvey.
Chuck Harvey, nice to meet you. And another one, sir.
Bob Packowitz.
Bob, yes, sir.
Bob Cox.
Bob Cox.
George Wyking.
I know you, George. All right, well, these are just some of the people that'll be part of this program today. We're expecting a large crowd, and Larry Metz is supposed to show up. So, gentlemen, on behalf of Lakefront TV, we want to thank you for your service, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm here now with State Representative Larry Metz. I want to thank you, Larry, for coming on Salute with us.
And thank you for allowing me to be on.
Well, we do appreciate you. Could you tell us a little bit about your feelings about today's event?
Well, I'm very grateful that we're having this event here in Leesburg to honor Florida's Vietnam veterans in this community. I think it's something that's long overdue for those veterans. Vietnam veterans served their country as honorably as any group of veterans ever served before them or since. The problem was that there was opposition to the war policy that people, for some reason, decided to take out on the veterans when they were returning home. And that is a stain on American history that I think we're slowly erasing over time. It's never too late to do the right thing, and so I think anyone who ever sees a Vietnam veteran should never hesitate to say to that Vietnam veteran, thank you and welcome home. And even if it's 42 years after U.S. involvement in the war ended, it's never too late.
Very well put, Larry. And I know you're a veteran too, a Marine, United
sir.
States Marine. And tell us, the viewers, when you were in.
Well, I joined the Marine Corps officer training program when I was 18 years old. I had to wait for my 18th birthday. That was in 1973. So I'm not a Vietnam veteran, but I went into the Marine Corps upon graduation from college in 1976 and served 4 years active duty and 2 years reserve duty. And all of my reporting seniors were Vietnam veterans, and many of the staff non-commissioned officers that I work with were also Vietnam veterans. And my affinity for Vietnam veterans began when I had just signed the papers to go in the Marine program in the spring of 1973, and we had a welcome home ceremony on the University of Florida campus for 2 POWs that had been released from captivity at the end of March '73, who had gone to the University of Florida. And I remember going to the Plaza of the Americas on the campus there for that welcome home ceremony for these heroes. And first of all, just seeing them on the platform there, they were gaunt looking, they were thin looking, they had been deprived of nutrition and in captivity. And so they came there, and there was a large group of hippies that were protesting the war, and they brought with them a Viet Cong flag that they had made, and they were yelling epithets at the veterans like baby killers and so forth, and they were waving that Viet Cong flag as the program was being conducted. And in fact, the Viet Cong flag actually went into my face when they waved it back and forth, and I ripped it off the pole and threw it to the ground. And the war protesters were angry at me and went to the police and wanted me to be arrested for interfering with their flag. But I told the officer it hit me in the face and I couldn't see the program, and he agreed with me that I had a right to clear the view.
Yeah.
So, but that showed me how wrong it was. At that time, I knew it was wrong for them to be interrupting a welcome home ceremony and waving the enemy flag in the face of these heroes. It was offensive, it was wrong, and it wasn't the only time that that had been done. I've talked to many Vietnam veterans who came home, and they tell stories of being spat on at airports, of having to change out of their uniforms to go on liberty, of not being allowed to get into a taxi cab when they're in uniform. One veteran told me that he was allowed in the taxi cab, but only if he sat down on the floor so that no one could see the taxi driver.
They were afraid to damage the cab.
They were afraid of getting eggs and
demonstrators.
tomatoes thrown at the cabs, and so
Yeah.
this is so wrong on so many levels. And so when I got elected to the Florida House in 2010, I took some steps to try to bring attention to Vietnam veterans. We had the 40th anniversary of the end of U.S. involvement in the war on March 30th, 2013. I tried to make that a state holiday with my first Vietnam Veterans Bill in 2011, and I brought it back in 2012. I couldn't get that bill passed because of fiscal impacts that the state was concerned with. So we had our own welcome home parade, as you well know, in May of 2013.
Yeah, it
we
was
just
great.
decided we're going to do it in our own community. We had a group of great veterans that came together and put that on, and I was a part of that, and proudly so. And we had Vietnam veterans walking down Main Street, in some cases riding down Main Street in Tavares on Armed Forces Day in May of 2013, and had a great welcome home ceremony for them in Lake County. I know that that's caught on. Citrus County had an event like that earlier this month, which I think is great that we're seeing other
Yeah, I heard
communities
that was
do
a good
this.
turnout. Unfortunately, I missed it.
So today is a special day because we're now honoring our Vietnam veterans here in Leesburg, and I just wanted to come by and read a resolution that I sponsored this year entitled Florida's Vietnam Veterans, which brings attention to them once again and calls upon the state to recognize and appreciate their service and to thank them, even though it is 42 years after the U.S. involvement ended and 40 years after we removed our last personnel from the embassy there.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for your time. We're going to be listening to your presentation.
Sure.
I know your dinner's going to be getting cold, so I want to thank you for
Thank
coming
you,
out,
Bob, for having me on.
Salute, and we'll be together again pretty soon, I hope.
And I appreciate your Vietnam service yourself personally, as well as your commitment to veterans here in the community through Lakefront TV and other efforts that I've seen you at. You're very proactive in supporting our veterans, and I really want to thank you for doing that.
They're my brothers. We're all in this together.
I understand.
You know that?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So,
Semper
thank
Fi.
you again. Take care,
Appreciate
brother.
it.
Bye. Okay.
Representing the U.S. Marine Corps, Corporal Chuck Harvey. Representing the U.S. Navy, Aviation Boatswain's Wing, Third Class George Wykan. Representing the U.S. Air Force, Airman Third Class J.R. Ray. Representing the U.S. Coast Guard, Electronics Technician, First Class Frank Ballant. Representing Prisoner of War and Missing in Action, Sergeant Tom Lobchecki. All please rise for the posting the colors and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem. American flag, Lance Corporal, U.S. Marine Corps, Bob Hazelwick. Florida, Special 4, U.S. Army, Ken Magachek. Rifle, Warren Clark, Special 4, U.S. Army. Rifle, Bob Cox, Sergeant, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army.
Detail, right face. Present, arm.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and singing of the national anthem. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order, arm. Detail, left face. Detail, be seated.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to first of all just thank all the veterans who are here today and their families as well, but particularly our Florida's Vietnam veterans. I just want to let you know we really appreciate everything that you did. My interest in the Vietnam veterans began actually when I was 18 years old in 1973. I had just signed my commitment to go into the Marine Corps Officer Training Program that summer. And it was at the University of Florida, and we had a welcome home celebration for Vietnam veterans, in particular 2 POWs who had been released about a month earlier. So we were on campus for this welcome home ceremony, and I showed up there, and I was on the rope line and saw the Air Force officers that had been released. They were gaunt looking, they were very thin, they had not been well nourished during their captivity. But there was a large group of Vietnam War protesters there, hippies, with one of them had a flag of the Viet Cong on a pole that they had made, and they were yelling at the veterans, the heroes. They were yelling epithets at them and waving this enemy flag, calling them baby killers and other horrible things. And the flag hit me in the face, and I couldn't see what I was looking at, so I ripped it off the pole and threw it on the ground. And the protesters were angry at me and wanted me to be arrested, and the police officer said, well, you hit him in the head with the flag. You had a right to clear the vision. So nothing came of that. But it was very offensive to me that these people would show up and so poorly treat our heroes from the Vietnam War, and it stuck with me for a long time. I served in the Marine Corps beginning in 1976, and all of my superiors were Vietnam veterans, and many of my staff non-commissioned officers that worked with me were Vietnam veterans. So I knew how poorly they had been treated, and then when I ran for office in 2010, the current office that I hold, I started asking Vietnam veterans out on the trail how they had been treated. Just wanted to reinforce what I thought was the case, and every one of them told horrible, horrible stories about their treatment coming back from the war. So I've worked in the legislature to try to help Vietnam veterans as much as I could. I tried to make the 40th anniversary of the end of U.S. involvement in the war, which was March the 30th of 2013. I wanted to make that a state holiday, but I couldn't get that bill passed because of the fiscal impacts on it. So we had our own Welcome Home Parade in Tavares for Vietnam veterans in Lake County in Armed Forces Day in May of 2013. And we also, last year, passed a bill that went into law, Governor Scott signed it, that changed the references in the statutes. It said Vietnam era in the Florida statutes, and we changed it to say Vietnam War, because that's exactly what it was. But that same bill, by the way, changed Korean conflict to Korean War at the same time. So this year we have a resolution that was mentioned, House Resolution 9097. I sponsored this because I knew we were coming up on the 40th anniversary of our embassy evacuation, which is the final involvement that we had there, even though our official involvement ended 2 years earlier. But this resolution, I just want to read it. I'm not going to read the entire resolution. The first 4 whereas clauses talk about the early history of the conflict that began before we were there. And then I'll just pick up where it says, whereas on August 7, 1964, the United States Congress overwhelmingly passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which effectively handed over the war-making powers to President Kennedy's successor, President Lyndon Johnson, until such time as peace and security had returned to Vietnam. And whereas in 1965, there were 184,000 United States troops in Vietnam, and by 1969, that number had grown to more than 500,000 troops. And whereas on January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords was signed, which required the release of all United States prisoners of war held in North Vietnam and the withdrawal of all United States armed forces. And on March 30, 1973, the United States completed the withdrawal of combat troops. And whereas during the course of the war, more than 58,000 members of the United States Armed Forces lost their lives in Vietnam, and more than 300,000 were wounded. And whereas because of the intense public opposition to the war that existed at the time, members of the United States Armed Forces returned home to an unprecedented lack of formal positive recognition of their honorable service and the tremendous sacrifices they had made on behalf of their country. And whereas the lack of formal welcome home parades and other traditional celebrations that were common for United States soldiers returning from previous military engagements, coupled with verbal and sometimes physical abuse, resulted in great disillusionment, undeserved indignity, and often great suffering and anguish among returning Vietnam veterans. Whereas it was not until 1982 that the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was dedicated in the District of Columbia to commemorate those members of the United States Armed Forces who died or were declared missing in action in Vietnam. And whereas it is fitting and appropriate that the House of Representatives encourage and support efforts within the state to redress the lack of appropriate recognition and undeserved ingratitude that so many of these brave servicemen and servicewomen received upon returning home. And whereas Florida thanks and welcomes home those members of the United States Armed Forces who served during the Vietnam War, including more than 500,000 who are residents of this state. Now therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the state of Florida that in recognition of the 42nd anniversary of the end of the United States involvement in the Vietnam War, state agencies and officials, counties, municipalities, community organizations, and residents are called upon and encouraged to publicly acknowledge and demonstrate the state's appreciation for the honorable service and sacrifice of its Vietnam veterans. That, ladies and gentlemen, was adopted by the Florida House of Representatives, meaning every member, 120 of them, representing 20 million people, agreed with that, and that's why it was adopted. So in closing, I just want to say to my colleagues here from the armed forces, and particularly the Vietnam veterans who served so honorably, your service to our country was as honorable as any group of veterans that served before you or since, and we should never forget that. So it is never too late to do the right thing. And so for everyone out there, I hope they will take the opportunity when they see a proud Vietnam veteran wearing their hats, wearing their shirts, wearing their pins showing the Vietnam service ribbon, that they will approach them and just say to them, thank you and welcome home. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, ma'am.
We're here at the Community Center here in Leesburg for this special event honoring our veterans. And with me now is Mr. Robert Miller, who is a veteran chaplain. Nice to meet you, sir. Thank you for your service, and
Good to meet you.
Thank you very much for what you did during Vietnam. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm ancient.
You were
I
a
was-
chaplain with
I
the
was a-
Army?
I was an old man when I was in Vietnam. I was over 30 years old. Most of the kids were around 17 to 22, something like that. So I was one of the older people there. My job was to go out and to provide spiritual services for the troops, wherever they may be. And so I did a lot of traveling. I went by helicopter, went by truck, went by feet, whatever it took, we went out there to give them. And we would go and see that every soldier had the opportunity to participate in a worship service at least once a week while he was in Vietnam. And it was my job to provide those services for my unit. And the picture here that you see is a picture of me a long, long time ago when I was a young man. And I'm out holding one of those services. And these are the troops, what they would...
This was in country in Vietnam. Do you remember about where about you were?
In the Cu Chi area, which would be, they had 1, 2, 3, and 4 divisions, and this would have been the 3rd division. It was just west of Saigon. So we were down, and I'm not exactly sure where this picture was taken. It was taken near the end of my tour there, and we were moving then because they had the what they called the ARVN transfer. They were putting the South Vietnamese troops were taking over the territory as we were slowly withdrawing out of them. So I don't know the exact location of this, but it was in that particular area there. And what happened is the guys would be out on patrol, and the chaplain would show up, and half of them would stand guard. They'd form a perimeter and stand guard, and the other half would come to worship services. And then when that was over, that half would go and do guard, while those that were on guard had the opportunity to come and worship also. And at each service, I gave communion. And I'm a Protestant, a chaplain, and we had Catholic chaplains also who went out to serve specifically to give mass for the Catholic people. But everybody came to the services. All the Protestants went to mass, and the Catholics they came to my Protestant services. They all took communion. No, I never had one person refuse it, not even the Jewish personnel that were there.
Yeah.
And it simply said to me anyhow, that all people are in a search for God, and that they have a place where they're comfortable in finding that, but they'll look anywhere and they'll go anywhere to have that touch with God in their life.
Very well put, my friend. You were obviously Army, I'm assuming, right?
I was, yes.
Army, because I learned from Chaplain Stan Beach, who's a very good friend of mine, that chaplains, they could be any branch, depending
Right.
on what uniform you guys wore.
Right.
So, and Captain Beach was with the Navy, who's with the Marines.
Uh-huh.
And, well, I want to thank you for granting me a little time to come on our show. And how did you get the picture, though? I mean, obviously you didn't take it. Somebody did, and how did it get here?
Actually, when I was having this service, there was a photographer out there. He was taking stuff for his newspaper and so forth, and he took this picture of me, and somehow or other he found out who I was and where I was, and he gave it to me.
Oh, that's great.
And I had it in a box in my house, and my daughter called me one night and said, "Dad, do you know where that picture is of you having services with the military?" And I said, "Nah, it's in a box somewhere, but why?" And she said, "Well, your granddaughter wants to take it to school for show and tell." So I looked it up and found it, sent it to her, I emailed it to her, and then she went and had this picture enlarged to that size and gave it to my son for a Christmas present last Christmas. My wife and I were down there and we saw it, and she said, "I want it." So now my wife has it.
So you stole it from your son?
Well, no.
I'm only
he's
kidding,
he's
Chapel.
my son. You don't steal from relatives,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know.
You borrow.
Yeah, you just take it. And then when they want it back, they wait till you die and then they get it back, you know.
Well, Chaplain, I want to thank you for coming on Salute. Thank you for your
You're
time.
welcome.
I don't want to hold you up any longer because your food is going to be getting cold in there.
Thank you.
So thank you, and I'll be right back in a few minutes with Representative Larry Metz. I'm here with George Coons, a World War II veteran, and my good friend Bill Cumba, who's been on Lakefront TV. I think the ratings went through the roof, Bill, when you were on. How you doing, my friend?
Oh, great.
What did you think about today's little ceremony?
I thought it was wonderful and long overdue.
Yeah. Well, it's always a pleasure seeing you again, the U.S. Marine Bill Cumba. Bill was awarded 3 Purple Hearts. We're going to give him a 4th one, you know, but he told him I wasn't wounded enough. And you, sir, you were in the.
I was in the Navy.
You were in the Navy during World War II?
I was in a photographic squadron in World War II based on Guam, and we flew all over the South Pacific area there. And at the end of the war, we were flying over Japan, over southern Japan, and the Japanese fighters came up and looked at us, but when they saw we were photography, they went down without shooting.
Yeah.
I was mighty lucky.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, that was a very big part of World War II, especially, you know, where they wanted to find the airstrips and stuff, because nowadays planes can fly all over the world and they could just leave from here. But back then, you had to have guys like this guy here, and the Marines come in Okinawa and take over and make an airfield out of it.
Yeah.
And you guys had to film it all to make sure we got it done right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you guys for coming today. It's a pleasure meeting you. It's a pleasure having you on Lakefront TV. And if you ever want to stop by the studio, I'll give you my card and you come do a show and maybe bring some of your memorabilia with you.
Okay.
All right, I thank you. And we're gonna, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll have you guys help me say goodbye. Are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
All right. You ready to do a salute? To all our veterans out there, our active military and their family, we salute you for all you do. Till next time. All right. It's always a pleasure seeing you, my friend.
Thank you. You too.
And it's an honor meeting you, sir. Well, we're about out of time, and I want to thank you for everything you've done on behalf of the veterans here today. And we're going to say goodbye, so I wish you would join me as we do this. To all our veterans out there, our active military and their families, we salute you for all you do. Till next time.